Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Kuf Zayin. We're going to get started where we left off, and then we're going to get kind of quite off track into health advice, ayin hara, and all sorts of other things. So starting with the Mishnah we started yesterday at the bottom of Kuf Vav Amud Bet, we have someone who is going to be a chocher on a field. Specifically a chocher, someone who again pays a certain amount from the beginning. If it's an aris, a sharecropper that pays percentages, then it seems it would be different, because if they agreed upon growing one thing, then obviously it's in the interest of the landowner to grow that item because they want to get proceeds of that. In this case, the sharecropper, the chocher, promised whatever, it doesn't matter what they plant, theoretically, unless they agreed upon planting one thing and the other item or crop that the sharecropper decides to plant is going to be bad for the land, then they're not allowed to change. So they agreed upon wheat, and then they switch it to barley, or barley to wheat. One direction works, and that's from wheat to barley, because barley is not as bad for the soil. But planting wheat weakens the soil. So if the owner said barley and not wheat, you can't switch to wheat. And likewise with grains versus legumes. Legumes are worse for the ground. So according to Tanna Kamma, you can't switch if it's going to be worse for the land, because again, the owner doesn't care what you plant, because the sharecropper is getting all the produce. It's just promises to pay whatever they promise to pay. They're going to pay that no matter what they plant. But the issue is it's going to be bad for their land, then you can't switch. But Rashbag had said you can't switch no matter what. And then we tried to figure out why that is. The suggestion yesterday was perhaps he thinks that this sounds like a lie, but in a different issue, he really didn't care if you do exactly as is said, and therefore it doesn't seem to have to do with this having to do like a real purist in terms of you said something, you have to do exactly what you said. Because when it comes to giving away the charity money that was collected for Purim, he's pretty lenient about you could use it for other things. So therefore, it can't be that. Starting from the top of our daf, Abai is going to give a different explanation. Amar Abai, Tamad Rabbi Shimon Kedemar. Rabbi Shimon, his reason is like what Mar said. Mar Abayu is always a reference to Rabba, who was his adopted father. Da Amar Mar, Haiman denicha le de titbayer are, lizre shata chite v'shata sari, shata shti v'shata erev. So what Abai says is that Rabba was quoted as saying, and here you can interpret this one way or the exact opposite way, that if you want to, if you want the nichale de titbayer, that your land should lay fallow. Now, what does it mean your land should lay fallow? Well, what we mean here is that your land, so again, you can interpret this, it's in one way and the opposite way. Some people think if you want things to be bad for you, this is what you should do, okay? If you want your land to ultimately stop producing produce, then switch every year what you plant. When your wheat, when your barley, that's bad for the land. Or 1 year, put your rows going in one direction, the other way, put them perpendicular, right? That's the shti and erev. But that's one interpretation. One is that if you want the land to be as if it laid fallow, meaning right, when land doesn't lay fallow, it works hard, and then it's going to be worse next season. So if you want it to be where you have great crops, but it's as if your land was fallow because you protect the land, then switch off. It gives the land like a break, because 1 year you did wheat, then you did barley, then you did wheat, then you did barley, and it's good for the land. So some people think this is good, some people think it's bad. Either which way, the interpretation is the same in terms of the overall picture, which is if the landowner wanted wheat and you switched it to barley, even though overall, you say, well, barley's not so bad for the land and wheat is worse for the land for the long term. But if they were on a set, now either if you say you should plant wheat every year, well, then this was a wheat field and he wanted the wheat to be planted every year, not to switch off to barley, because that in and of itself is bad for the land. So even though barley itself isn't, but switching every year would be bad. Or the reverse. Maybe if you interpret it as wheat, barley, wheat, barley, wheat, barley is good, well, he was on a wheat year and then you planted barley, well, that's not good. So that's the explanation for why Rashbag thinks that any change could be potentially bad, because the owner could be on a particular cycle that they want to be doing, and you're messing that up for them. By the way, this whole thing, you should switch off years and all that, is only if you don't plow twice. Kriv is to plow, and tane is to do it a second time. like Mishnah, from like a second time, a review, right? Mishnah, the word Mishnah comes from reviewing, because they would review them by heart. So what they're saying here is, if you plowed at the end after you harvested at the end of the season, and then you plowed again at the beginning of the season, then it rejuvenates the land. It doesn't matter whether you plant again, whichever interpretation you go by, whether it was good to plant, it's bad if you do wheat, barley, or the reverse. It's bad if you do wheat. But it's all irrelevant if you happen to plow in between. They're just telling you some advice about agriculture. So now we're going to start with a different version of this Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda taught Ravin. Let's just go through characters. Rabbi Yehuda, second generation. He was a student of Rav and Shmuel. First Rav, then when Rav died, he became a student of Shmuel. He was like one of their prize students. And Ravin is third generation, and he's one of those people who goes back and forth to Israel. He was a Babylonian, but he went to Israel and learned Torah there, and he's constantly bringing the Torah of Israel to Babylonia, which is what we see all the time, and also the reverse. It's just we're in the Bavli, so we hear all the things he quotes to the Babylonians. So Matnila Rav Yehuda l'Ravin, Tfu'ah Yisraena Kitni. Now in our Mishnah it said if you agreed on grains, you can't plant legumes because it's bad. But Rav Yehuda, his version of the Mishnah said, Tfu'ah Yisraena Kitni. You can switch from grains to legumes without a problem. So Amarle, Ravin said to him, but doesn't our Mishnah say Tfu'ah lo Yisraena Kitni? The opposite of what you said. You're not allowed to do that. Amarle lo kashya halan halahu is a famous answer many times. That's for those people, and this is for us. Okay, meaning, and interesting, he's telling this to Ravin, who was living in Eretz Israel. He said, oh, your version, that matches the Israeli version. In Israel, it's not good to plant the legumes. It's bad for the land. But in Babylonia, we have different land, okay? Agricultural advice, obviously, is not always clear-cut. It depends where you live and what the circumstances are. In Babylonia, it was very moist land. There was tons of rain. We talked about that in the whole sugya about the rain, and when you ask for rain, Babylonia, it's different than in Israel. And because of that, it doesn't make a difference if you switch from one to the other in Babylonia. And that's why his version of the Mishnah, or the way he was teaching it anyway, was the version that matched what the Babylonians was, because he's in Babylonia. Okay, now we're going to start with three other statements that Rav Yehuda tells Ravin, which are a range of topics, not really connected. But because we started with this Mishnah, the version of the Mishnah that he brought to Ravin, we're now going to have three other statements he makes to Ravin. Amar le Rav Yehuda le Ravin bar Rav Nachman. And the first one is related to agriculture. Some of them are related, but a little more distant. So this one at least is a little more connected, but again, a different issue. Hani tachle de bekitana ein behem mishum geza. There's cress. If cress grows among a field with flax, and someone comes along and takes the cress and steals it, it's not considered theft. Why is that? Because cress growing among the pishtan, the flax, causes it to weaken. It's not good for the flax crop. And flax is worth a lot, right? They use it for clothing. And it was very significant. And therefore, if somebody pulls it out of your yard, it's actually, they're doing you a favor. So it's not considered theft. But omdot al gvulin yesh ba mishum gezel. But if it's on the edges of the field, then it's not affecting the flax crop, and therefore it would be considered stealing. If already they're fully grown and they're already solid and hardened, even if they're mixed in with the flax, where the flax is growing, it's still going to be considered stealing. Whatever they caused weakening of the flax crop has already been done. In other words, at the later stage, all the damage is done already. At this point, it's not damaging anymore. So if someone takes it at this stage, if they had taken it earlier, it wouldn't be stealing. If they take it at this stage, then already it's stealing because it's not causing any new damage. The damage is done. That was the first statement. Now we move on to the second. Amalei Rav Yehuda l'Ravin bar Rav Nachman. Ravin achi. Ravin, my brother, he wasn't his brother. He's just a nice term of endearment. He said it the last time too. Hane dili dilach v'dilach dilei. And now we're going to learn they were neighbors. They bordered on the same field. Their fields bordered on each other. And Rabbi Yehuda says, some of my trees are yours and some of your trees are mine. What does this mean? Now b'nei Metzra Ilana notel lekan ulekan, vanotel lekan ulekan. In other words, what he's saying is, if there's a tree, okay, and there's, again, different interpretations exactly how to understand this. If there's a tree standing on the border between two fields, and the roots, okay, what they assume is that, I saw in the commentaries, I think Rashi says it, that it's a little bit raised up here. And the roots grow only onto one side. So whatever side the roots are in, that's the person who gets to benefit from the fruits of the tree. So if you would have said, there's things that appear to be on my territory, but since all the roots go into your side of the field, therefore the fruits are yours. And likewise, there's some trees of yours that actually are mine because the roots go into my field. And now he quotes a machloken, and he basically says, I hold like Shmuel over Rav. I'm sorry, I hold like Rav over Shmuel, my mistake. De Itmar, Ilan ha'omer al ha'metzal, exactly what we're talking about, a tree that stands on the border of two fields. Amarav, hanotel lekan lekan, vanotel lekan lekan. And the assumption, again, there's different interpretations. We'll go with Rashi. If the roots go onto one side, then it all belongs to that side, that owner. Shmuel amar cholkin. Now Shmuel disagrees, but Rabbi Yehuda didn't hold like him. Shmuel disagrees and says we split it 50-50. Okay, if it's on the border, so 50-50. Now, Meitive, they're going to bring a question against Rav's opinion. Meitive, Ilan ha'omer al ha'metzar yachloku. So if the Ilan is standing on the border, we split it 50-50. Well, that sounds exactly like Shmuel. Tiyuv to Rav, and that's a contradiction to Rav. So Shmuel explains it according to Rav that it means when it's actually the entire tree is on the border, then we're going to split it 50-50. In other words, what he means is that all the roots are also equally on the border, which means either no man's land or shared land, and therefore they're going to have to split it 50-50. But again, if the roots are all on one side, which is why Rashi is a little hard to understand, because weird that you would have roots all on one side, which is why I think they also said it's kind of raised up a little, and then the roots go down, and when they go down, they go toward one side, and they don't really go at all into the other side's property. Again, the reality of this is a little hard to understand. And like I said, there's different interpretations about whether we're talking about the roots, perhaps we're talking about the branches. It's not exactly clear what we mean here. But we'll go with Rashi, who says we're talking about the roots, and then Shmuel, what's nice here is there was a contradiction against Rav, and Shmuel, who disagreed with Rav as it is, and the source fit perfectly with Shmuel, tried to give us a resolution according to Rav's opinion, and said it must be that source was talking about when all the roots are actually smack in the middle on the border and not actually in anyone's field, and then we're going to split it 50-50. To which the Gemara says, Ihachi, if you're going to explain it that way, Ma'ila Memra, what's the chiddush? It's obvious. You don't need a source to tell us that. Obviously, if it's right in the middle and it's owned by both, or owned by no one, and they're both, their fields are right next to it, then of course it would be split 50-50. Well, maybe what they mean is when the branches go onto one side more so. And then they say, well, akati ma'ila, still, what should it make a difference? It's the roots. Well, ma'u detema de armale plug hachi, kamash malan de armale ma'chad de hachi plug hachi. You might have thought that the one who the branches are leaning toward their field can say, divide it like this. In other words, don't divide it by the roots, divide it by the branches. But the point is that the person, right, the other side can say, the one who's the branches are not leaning into their territory, no, it's in the middle, and we're going to split it this way, not based on the branches, but based on the roots. Okay. This, by the way, is a bit of an intro to, like a bit of a lead into Bava Batra. I'll mention already that details to the Siyum, God willing, will go out on Sunday. But Siyum is coming up on the 26th of the month on a Wednesday. And this is already kind of getting into neighbor relations. Tomorrow we're going to deal with Dina de Bar Metzra, the neighbor who has basically first dibs to buy the property next door, and all sorts of relationships between neighbors, which is really the way Bava Batra starts out. Amalei Rav Yehuda l'Rav and Bar Rav Nachman. Okay, we often see this at the end of Masechtot that we kind of already start going into the next one. Now, in this point, we actually are still, if you remember, this is all one big Masechet. So it's just, anyway. Amalei Rav Yehuda l'Rav and Bar Rav Nachman. Third thing he tells them, and from here we're going to get all off on a tangent into Ayin Hara and things like that. Rav and Achi, lo tizabin ara desmicha lamata. Don't buy land close to the city. What does it mean, land close to the city? Well, if you remember, the cities were where people lived, and the fields were outside the city. So he said, don't buy the fields that are close to the city. Why? Because everyone's going to walk by your field, and they're going to see your stuff growing, and they're going to say, oh, what a nice field. Everything's growing so nicely in her field. And they're going to be a little jealous because their stuff is growing as nicely, and that will bring an ayin hara upon you. Ayin hara always means, right, people are jealous. They look at your and say, oh, what you have is great. And that sometimes brings calamity upon your stuff. Okay, so ayin hara, we're going to see today, is very, very dangerous. It causes all sorts of bad things to happen. And therefore, better not to buy the land near the city. To Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, okay, Rabbi Yehuda quotes, Rabbi Abba quoting, Rav Huna quoting Rav, Asur lo la'adam she'amor al seh chavero b'sha'a she'omedet b'kamoteha. Here's a different approach, which is not don't buy near the city, but don't be the person looking at someone else's field when everything's growing beautifully. Kamoteha is when the grains are standing. Don't go looking at someone else's field because you're going to bring an ayin hara upon it, because you're going to be jealous, and jealousy causes bad things to happen, and it might cause their crops to be destroyed, and it's kind of your fault. I mean, obviously it's not direct damage, but you shouldn't do that. Ini, is this really true that you shouldn't buy near the city? And now we're going to see a contradiction, and from here we're going to get off on a bit of a tangent, and then we'll get back to resolving the contradiction, which we'll do at the very top of the next Amud. So you'll see this goes a little while before we get there. And then we're going to get into ayin hara, off on a tangent. So right now they're going to darshan the following psukim from Sefer Dvarim, chapter 28, kind of well-known psukim. Amar lehu. Okay, so, sorry, I think I skipped a few words. Ha'eshgapinhu Rabbi Abba l'talmidei Rav. Rabbi Abba bumps into a bunch of students of Rav. And Rabbi Abba says to the students of Rav, Amar lehu, my Amar Rav b'hanekad. How did Rav explain the following psukim? Baruch atah ba'il, u'baruch atah b'sadeh. You'll be blessed in the city, you'll be blessed in the fields. Baruch atah b'vo'echa, baruch atah b'tzeitecha. You'll be blessed when you go in, you'll be blessed when you go out. So what do these mean? Amrule, and they said, Hachi Amar Rav, here we'll quote you what Rav said. Baruch atah ba'il, she'beitcha samuch lebeit hakneset. You'll be blessed in the city. What does it mean to be blessed in the city? That your house should be near the shul, so you could be one of the first people to get to shul, right? It's a big blessing. The shuls were also on the outskirts. So it's better, right? It's like a good thing. You'll be blessed. If you're blessed, that means your house is near the shul. Meaning also you should try to get a house near the shul. That will bring blessing upon you. Baruch atah b'sadeh, shu nechasecha krovim la'ir. Now, here's the exact opposite of what we saw. Your property should be near the city. Okay, why will that be a blessing? Because you don't have to schlep, right? When you get your produce and you want to bring it back into the city, the farther away you are, the more work it's going to be. You'll have to hire workers. If you remember, you have to pay for transportation for your workers one way. That means it's going to take them longer to get there if it's far away, right? It's much more convenient to have it closer to the city. That's going to bring, that's a blessing. Okay, so that's our contradiction, and we'll have to resolve it because Rabbi Yehuda said, don't take the fields near the city. It's bad. Baruch atah, but in any case, we're going to keep going on this list. Baruch atah b'vo'echa. When you come in, you should be blessed. What's the blessing when you come in? Go on a long trip and you come home. You shouldn't come home, right? The blessing is you won't come home when your wife is safek nida. Yeah, this is interesting. Why safek nida? Safek nida means perhaps, she's not sure if she's in nida or not, right? If she was in nida, so okay, it's bad, but at least you know definitively. But if she's potentially safek nida, that's like the worst of the worst because you don't even know if she really is, and then you have to refrain from being together. Baruch, right? It's like we always say, there's, like when there's sfekot, it's the worst. When you have lack of clarity, it's worse than actually knowing things are not good. But when you're not sure if they're good, not good, that's like the worst position to be in. Next. Baruch atah b'tzeitecha, last Rasha here. She'et tzetzaim me'echa kemotcha, right? This is every parent's dream, that your children be exactly like you. Okay, some of us want our kids to be better than us, but most people at least want your kids to be like you, if not better than you, right? So that's a bracha, that your kids will be like you, right? They darshan seitcha, like tzetzaecha, the things that come out of you, not you going out of the city, but b'tzeitecha, the things that come out of you. Ba'amar lehu Rabbi Yochanan, ba'amar lehu. So then he said to them, after Rabbi Abba was told by the students of Rav, this is how Rav darshan the pasuk. Okay, again, before we get to the resolution of the contradiction, we're still kind of getting into this conversation between them. Rabbi Yochanan lo amar haki. Rabbi Yochanan didn't say like that. Rabbi Yochanan had a different way of darshaning this pasuk. Again, we get back to rabbis in Israel versus rabbis in Babylonia. Ela baruch atah ba'il she'eh beit hakiseh samuch l'shulchanecha, aval beit hakneset lo. Okay, this is a big difference. The beit hakiseh or the beit hakneset, they sound similar, but one's the bathroom, one's the shul. You should have the bathroom close to your table because sometimes after eating, you need to go right away. And the blessing is you should have an outhouse that's, because again, they didn't have bathrooms in their houses. Your outhouse should be close to your table. Why not Beit HaKnesset? Well, Rabbi Yochanan L'Ta'ameh, he's consistent with what he says. Da'amar schar psiot yesh. Okay, anyone who lives far from the shul, you get rewarded for walking far to shul. Okay, so better to have the shul far from you, and then you get sachar, you get rewarded for walking to shul. Baruch atah b'sadeh, shiu nechasecha meshulashim. What does it mean to be blessed in the field? It means you should, in order to get a blessing, what should you do? Make sure to what we call diversified. Shlish b'tuah, shlish b'zeitim, shlish b'gfanim. Okay, when you plant your field, don't plant everything the same. Plant grains, a third. Plant olives, a third, and vines, and a third. Okay, so that you have the three basics, right? These come up all the time in the Torah, Dagan, Tirosh, and Yitzhal, that you have those three, and you diversify, and that way you don't have only one thing. And let's say it goes bad, you're at a huge loss. Baruch atah b'vo'echa, baruch atah b'tzeitecha, shetehei yitziatcha min ha'olam kibiyatcha la'olam. The way you go out of the world should be the way you came into the world. Ma biyatcha la'olam b'lo chet, af yitziatcha min ha'olam b'lo chet. Same way you came into the world without any sin, you should leave the world without sin. So those are two different versions of this pasuk. The main reason we brought this, though, was so that we heard about this contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda said, don't buy the fields close to the city. And Rav said it's a blessing to have fields close to the city. So turning now to Amabet, lo kasha, had mahadar le'shur v'ritka, v'had lo mahadar le'shur v'ritka. What's the difference? Well, one is a case where you didn't build a fence and a wall around the field. Then you have to worry about ayin hara, and that's what Rav says. That's what Rav Yehuda said. But when Rav said you should have close to the city, he meant in a way where you put a wall around it. If you put a wall or a fence around it, and then people can't see your field, that it won't bring ayin hara. So then you'll have all the benefits. You'll be close, and there'll be no ayin hara. Now, since we talked about ayin hara, we're going to get off on a tangent, and we're going to read this pasuk. Ve'sir Shem mimcha kol choli. It's a pasuk in Dvarim, chapter 7. God is going to remove from you all disease. Now, they assume all disease means some disease that's a terrible disease. And now we're going to have 5 interpretations of what is this horrible disease that kills people. Okay, that's the idea here. And the pasuk says God is going to take this away from you. It won't attack you. All the terrible things happen to the Mitzrim. God will not put upon you. And they will be put on your enemies and not you. So what is this kol machala? We're going to have 5 interpretations. And it starts with Rav, who says it's ayin hara, which connects with what we were talking about. Amar Rav zo ayin. Okay, that's the eye, the evil eye. Right, that's what ayin hara translates literally as the evil eye. Rav L'Ta'ameh, and Rav goes according to, he's consistent with his opinion, he says somewhere else. De Rav Selik Lebeit Kivrei, he went up to the cemetery. Ava Maida Avid, he did what he did. Okay, Rashi says, he did an incantation. He walked by all the graves, and doing this incantation, he was able to determine what, like some, kind of came to him, what the people died of. Okay, and what Rashi explains is there's 2 ways people die. Either you die in the right time, or you die earlier, and that's because of ayin hara. Okay, and this is what Rav's theory was. Amal, and he said, 99% of the people that I did this incantation with died because of ayin hara, and before their time, because people were jealous of them, and then that caused their death. And 1 b'derech eretz, only 1 died in a normal, natural manner. Okay, now, whether we believe this or not, that this really happened or didn't happen, he knew how to do these incantations and bring, information from the dead about how they died, right? And whether really 99% died from ayin hara, unlikely that the Gemara really means that this is meant to be taken literally. But again, we've seen this many times where the rabbis, when they want to teach a lesson, they couch it in these kind of terms, what we call the fear, the threat, what he's basically telling people is, you should really be cautious about being jealous, right? Jealousy was a major, major issue. And back then, now, right, always. people being jealous of other people. And I think that he was really just using this as a way to warn people and say, you should know, you should stay as far away as you can from the ayin hara, from being jealous of people, because it causes death, okay? And basically it's a way of, right, scaring people into thinking that if they do that, it will cause death, even though we know that not necessarily, it's not necessarily the truth that that's the way it is, but right, basically he was trying to warn them, stay away from the evil eye, okay? Try not to, again, try not to, number one, we saw this in two ways. Don't cause other people to be jealous of you. Don't show off. Don't have the feel that everyone can see and bring ayin hara upon you. And also don't bring it upon other people. Don't be jealous of them, which might then cause destruction. So that's the first explanation of what kol machala, that all diseases, the root of all diseases, according to Rav, is the ayin hara. Shmuel amar ze haruach, it's the wind. And what he means is, if you remember, we talked about not so long ago, the surgery that they did, right, when he went out to get all his insides taken out. And he did it in a house of shayish, okay, marble. And they always say marble because somehow that keeps out the wind. There's always this concern when you open someone up, the wind will come in and that will, right, again, how do we understand this? This seems to be open, right? When you have things that are open, infection, you get lots of infections come in. I think that with Shmuel, first of all, who was a doctor, he's talking about infections coming into people's bodies, and that, as we know, could be fatal. So Shmuel l'tamein, he's consistent with his approach. Tamar Shmuel, hakol b'ruach. He said somewhere else, everything's all from this ruach. So the Shmuel, now they ask, ka'ika harugei machut, but what do you mean? There's people who the Romans killed, like the people who died from the kingdom that are executed. They don't die from, you said hakol b'ruach, they're taking him very literally. Well, hanach nami ilav zika avdelu sama v'chai. He says, even the harugei machut, were it not for the wind, the zika is the wind, ilav zika, if it were not for the wind, avdelu sama, they could have given them some sort of drug, v'chai, and they would survive. But the fact is, when they, stabbed them or did whatever they did to them, right? That's, I think, what they mean here, or really the harugei machut usually are killed by the sword. So once that happens, right, their body's open and then the wind gets in. And again, this means, right, they get infections. And if it were not for that, they could have actually survived the wound. Rabbi Chanina Amar, third interpretation, Zotzina, this is cold, right? Was grew up, oh, you got a cold, there's a breeze, you're going to get sick. Cold is going to cause you to get sick. To Amar Rabbi Chanina, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mitzinim pachim. Okay, everything is in the hand of God other than, some people explain this as tsinim is cold, and some people say pachim is extreme heat. This is like global warming. Okay, right? There's things out of control. God, that, in other words, certain things, God brings certain punishments on people, but tsinim pachim, that's something that God doesn't control. Shene'amar, and therefore it's the most dangerous because it's beyond control. Shene'amar tsinim pachim b'derech ikesh is a pasuk in Proverbs, Mishlei, shomer nafsho yirchak mehem. Okay, tsinim pachim on the path of a wicked person or a bad person, shomer nafsho should keep away from them. Okay, someone who's right should try to protect yourself from these things because these are right, extreme cold, extreme heat is really bad. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, fourth opinion, zot so'ah, this is excrement. But now we're going to talk about not what you would think of so'ah, but amar mar, so'ah tachotim. By the way, so'ah comes from yitziah, from latzet, right, things that come out of your body. So what is this? So'ah tachotim b'so'ah ta'ozen. Okay, the things that come out of the mucus in your mouth, the wax in your ear, in your nose, the wax in your ears. Ruban kasher umiyutan yafeh. If you have a lot of it, it's really bad. A little bit of it is good for your body. A little bit of, the waste coming up. But when it's a lot, right, there's basically a cold, like a terrible cold or some ear infection, and that's what's really kol machala. Rabbi Elazar Omer zomara. This is the gallbladder. Okay, this is our last interpretation. Tanya nami hachi, and there's a brighter to support this. Machala zomara. The word machala, when it says machala, okay, which is this pasuk that says hasiroti machala mikirbecha, God will take out machala from among you. What's the machala? Zomara, that's the gallbladder. The lama nikashma machala, why is it called that? We're going to have two interpretations. Shi machala kol gufo shel adam. Because when you have a problem with the gallbladder, it affects your entire body. Davar acher, a different interpretation. Machala, well in gematria, machala is 83. And shmonim ushlosha chalayim tluyim b'mara. there's 83 diseases you can get from problems with the gallbladder, and therefore machala is a reference to that by the gematria, by the numerical value of the letters adds up to 83, which is a reference to the mara. Now they tell you this one line, which is going to get us off on the next part of today's daf. We keep having very associative connections today, right? We started with the city, not living in the city, right? Because we started off with associative connections because we had different version of our Mishnah said by Rav Yehuda to Rabin. From there, we got to 3 statements Rav Yehuda said to Rabin. From there, we got to one of them had to do with Ayin Hara, not living close to the city. From there, we had a contradiction, right? Sorry, not buying a field close to the city. From there, we brought a contradiction. And then from there, we got into Ayin Hara, which then led us to these other 4 opinions about what Kol Machala is. From there, we get to, since we talked about this mara, this gallbladder problem, Kulam pat shacharit b'melach v'kiton shamayim mevatal tan. All these 83 diseases, there's one simple solution. Eat breakfast every day, okay? So for those, right, I know some people say, right, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Some people skip breakfast entirely. So here's your Gemara telling you, eat breakfast every day. And what should you eat for breakfast? Not a health shake, not cereal, breakfast cereal, which we grew up, all those commercials telling you how important it was to eat breakfast cereal. But pat shacharit b'melach, bread with salt, and kiton shamayim, and a jug of water. Okay? That cures all these 83 diseases you could get from your gallbladder. And in fact, not only does it do that, but Tanu Rabbanan, so from here we're going to get off on a braita of 13 great things that will happen to you if you eat bread in the morning. Okay, if you eat bread in the morning, 13 things happen to you. Number 1, you get saved from extreme heat and extreme cold. Minazikim, from the winds you're saved. Minha mizikim, from evil spirits. By the way, I want you to notice here that some of these have a bit of a ring to them, okay? It's a bit of a literary. Zikim and mizikim, right? Even though they're 2 totally different things, the winds and the evil spirits, okay? But they're strewn together here because there's a braita, and braita were memorized by heart, and we'll see a few of them. Also, chama, tzina, right? First of all, they're opposites, and they kind of sound, they have the same kind of the same amount of syllables, chama, tzina. Okay, machkima peti, it makes you smart. Because again, if you have food in your body, you can think properly, right? You're not distracted by your stomach saying, I need food in my body, or right, you're good for that. Zoche bedin, you prevail in court. Okay, why is that? I guess also because you're calmer, right? So you give better claim in court. You can think more clearly. Lumod Torah u'lelamed, to learn Torah and to teach. Dvarav nishma'im, people listen to you. Talmud domet kein biyado, whatever you learn will stick with you. Ein b'saro ma'ale hevel, you don't start sweating. By the way, means you should eat before you learn daf yomi in the morning. You don't sweat. Okay, nizkach li'ishto ve'eino mitaved l'isha acheret. You'll be able to have relations with your wife, and you won't start thinking about other women. V'hored, right? It'll give you the strength to have relations with your wife. Horeget kina shebibnei ma'ayim. It kills like worms or like things that are in your body. Some people say it actually gets rid of jealousy and increases love. Okay, by the way, kina and kina are 2 totally different words, but they also sound the same. They have a ring to them. Kina, kina. Okay, so there you have the 13 reasons to eat breakfast in the morning. Amar le Rava bar Meri. Menachem milta da amri nashe. So now we're going to have another thing, and we actually saw this sugya in Baba Kama. Rava says to Rava bar Meri, where do we get this quip that people say? Shitin rahute rahut. 60 runners can run, v'lo matu legaver de mitzafra kara. And they will never reach the guy who mitzafra from the morning. Karach had, fricha, by the way, is a sandwich in Hebrew. So, or karich. So, who had breakfast in the morning. Okay, karach lichroch is to eat. So, how do we know that the guy who eats breakfast, right? Here's your advice for marathon runners. Eat a good breakfast before, right? And then you'll win the race. But Amru Rabbanan, another thing, he's saying, what's the source for this as well? Eat early in the morning in the summer months because of the extreme heat, it'll protect you. And in the winter from the extreme cold, right? Eating in the morning will help you. So what's the pasuk for this? He asked Rava bar Meri. Amar le dichtiv Lo yira'avu v'lo yitzma'u v'lo yakem shara v'shemesh. Here's a pasuk from Yeshayahu. They won't be hungry, they won't be thirsty, and they won't be attacked by extreme heat. So now, what does this teach you this? Well, he explains the pasuk in the reverse. Lo yakem shara v'shemesh, you won't be attacked by extreme heat, and then they explain. And also it must include extreme cold. Kevan de lo yiravu v'lo yitzma'u, because they're not starving and they're not thirsty. In other words, by not starving yourself, it allows you to basically be able to protect yourself from the heat, the extreme heat. So Amar le, atamart li mihatam, v'ana minalach mehacha. Now, even though Rava asked this question of Rava Bar Meri, when Rava Bar Meri answers him, he says, oh, you learned it from there? I have a different pasuk. So obviously he knew the answer. He just wanted to see what pasuk he was going to learn it from. And now he says, I have a different pasuk. V'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem. And this we quoted the end of this pasuk before when we talked about that. Siroti machala mikirbecha. We're now going to see. Avadetem et Hashem Elokechem u'veracha lechmecha ve'et meimecha. It's a pasuk in Shmo Kaf Gimel. You should worship God, and God will bless your bread and your water. So now they explain what's about Avadetem et Hashem Elokechem. Zo kriyat shema u'tfilah. That means, right, serve God, which means prayer. Say Shema and Amidah and Shmona Esrei. וברך לחמך ואמימך זו פת במלח וקיטון שמיים. מכאן ואילך והסירות עם מחלה מקרבך. This is like a formula. If you worship God by davening, and berach lachmecha ve'amimecha, and you, instead of saying it, God will bless your bread, it means, and you eat bread and water in the morning, then the end of that pasuk will come true, which is hasiroti machala mikirbecha. God will take away any disease from you, because that's the way, right? This is a great line of how do you protect yourself? You daven, but I think they're also trying to tell you it's not all about davening. It's not just pray to God and don't take care of yourself, right? This whole sugya, I think, like, why are they going into eating breakfast in the morning? I think what they're trying to say is Judaism does not believe in fasting. Now, there are people who, who do think this is part, but this sugya is clearly saying, no, we are not a religion about abstaining, abstention, fasting, all that. No. This is important to take care of yourself as well. You should take care of yourself religiously and connecting to God, and take care of yourself physically as well, because you can't, right? The whole thing's of 13 things. Some of them were to learn, to teach, right? But you can only do those things if you're taking care of your body. Very interesting sugya. Okay, now we're going to end our daf with measuring and all different things about measurements. Amalei Rav Yehuda, probably because we had all these statements Rav Yehuda said to Rav, and now we have Rav Yehuda saying to Rav Ada Meshocha. Meshocha is the guy who measures. So the measurer, okay, his name was Rav Ada. Rav Yehuda said to him, Lo tizalzel b'meshichata, when you're measuring people's land and who's, where this person's land ends and the next one starts, be very careful, because kol porta uporta chase lekorn kamarishka. Every little piece of land, you might say, it's just a little piece, who really cares? But no, every little piece of land, you can plant some saffron, and saffron is very expensive, and people can make a lot of money on it. So any little piece of land you deprive someone of, you're depriving them of wealth. Amalei Rav Yehuda le Rav Ada Meshocha. Second statement he says to him, and there's really two statements here. Arba amota anigra zalzel behu ta'anara lo timshachenu klal. 4 amot of anigra, you can be mizalzel, you don't have to take it so seriously. And the ones by the Nahar, I'll explain to you in a minute what this is. You're not supposed to understand this. The ones by the river, you don't have to measure at all. Okay, so what are we talking about? What do we mean here? Well, what he wants to say is, anigra is 4, if you remember, 4 cubits is always the amount of space we need for people to be able to walk. So there's a water channel, and people in the area use the water channel to water their fields. So you have to leave 4 cubits on the side of it. Like if your field is right next to there, you have to leave 4 cubits for people to be able to walk. Says that you don't have to take so seriously. You can just estimate, and if it's a little less than 4, it doesn't really matter. We'll talk about in a minute why it doesn't matter. That's the anigra. The anara, though, if it's by the river, now the river is much bigger, and everybody goes to the river. So there you have to, don't measure it at all, means the opposite, means do it a wide 4 amot. In other words, estimate it, and estimate it wider than you would really think 4 amot are, because you need more than 4 cubits. And now we're going to talk about what's the difference. Rav Yehuda l'tameh, Rav Yehuda is consistent with what he says elsewhere. Da'amar Rav Yehuda, arba amot anigra livnei anigra, because the water channel, the 4 cubits are just for the people who live right nearby there. It's for individuals. There you don't have to be so careful. But the river is for everybody. And since for everybody, you need to leave a lot more space. So therefore, you have to be more generous about your 4 cubits, whereas you could be very stingy about the 4 cubits by the water channel. Mach is Rabbi Ami. And from here, we're going to get off into a story, classic Talmudic story, which ends badly, which you'll have to wait till the next daf to see. Rabbi Ami made an announcement that Malay, or a ruling, Malay katfe nagde betray ivrei nara kutsu. Okay, let's start from the end. On both sides of the Nahar, betray ivrei nara, both sides of the river, kotsu, you have to cut the trees. How wide? Malay katve nagde. What does that mean? It means the width of people's shoulders. Why? Because people would have boats and they would pull the boats onto the shore, and you need space about the shoulder width of a person in order to have people on the side pulling the boat in. So therefore, if you have trees there, they're not going to be able to pull their boat in. Rav Natan bar Hoshaya cuts shitzar amta. He went down to the river and just started cutting people's trees. And he cut them 16 cubits wide. Now that's way more than shoulder width. Atu ale b'nei Masronya, the people in b'nei Masronya went crazy, dafnu, and they gave him lashes for doing that. Who savar kirishad rabin? He thought you needed to be as wide. That's what 16 cubits is. Remember way back when in Eruvin we learned about this, and in Shabbos, right? 16 cubits wide is Rishud Rabin. So he thought, oh, well, it's a public place. People have to get there. So, but no, the lohi, but he was wrong. Hatam bi'inan kulehat. In Rishud Rabin, you need that kind of space for everyone to walk through. But here it's just to pull the ropes. Ashluye, or the ashlein, are the ropes, right? Amtuche is to pull. Kimalo katve nagde sage. It's enough just to have shoulders width of the people. So that was our first story. Now we get to our second story. Rabba bar Rav Huna, Havale hahu abad aguda dinara. He had a forest on the banks of the river. Amrulei nikutzmar. They said, cut your trees down. Amar lahu, kutzi ilai v'tatai v'hadari kutzana. First the guy above me and the guy below me should cut his trees, then I'll cut mine. To which they said, Hechi avad hachi, how could he have done that? B'haktiv, hit kosher shuva koshu. Okay, the way they understand this is, Amarish Lakish, kshot atzmecha v'acharka kshot achirim. Do things yourself first and then others. In other words, you should be an example. How could Rabba bar Rav Huna, right? He was a big Talmid Chacham also. How could he not see himself as an example? Why did he say, have the person above me and below? Now, you understand why he said the person above and below, because I'm going to do mine in the middle. Well, the guys need to pull their boats. They need to go up and down across the side of the river. Now, if there's nowhere to go here, because before me and after me, it's full of trees, then I'm not going to bother cutting my trees now, because no one's even going to use this side of the river. They're going to go to the other side, because it's not going to help. Now, even though we said you have to cut on both sides of the river, but if the guy below me and the guy above me on the river has tons of trees, no one's going to pull their boats in here. But the Gemara says, I don't understand. You cut it and you be an example for other people. They'll see you do it. They'll do it as well. So Hatam, now we explain why didn't he do it and why was he justified. Hatam avadebe parzik rufila hava. Okay, there was this guy, parzik rufila. He was not a Jew. He worked for he was part of the government of the Persians, the Persian ruler or governor. And Amar, if that guy does it, then I'll cut mine. He lived both above and below Rabba bar Rav Huna in the river. So Rabba bar Rav Huna said, what's the point of me cutting it? This guy's unlikely he's going to cut his trees, doesn't keep to Jewish law, and he doesn't really care about anybody. And if he doesn't cut them, then again, below lo mustagil. In other words, if he cuts them, then great, they'll have space to go and they'll pull their boats on this side. Otherwise, everyone's going to go on the other side of the river. They're not going to zigzag back to my area, which is open, and then go back to the other side. That's obviously not going to happen. So there's no reason for me to cut my trees. Okay, so far the story seems reasonable, but the story is going to go sour, and you'll have to wait till tomorrow. Although luckily tomorrow's stuff is going to go up very soon. So if you're really in suspense, you can listen soon. So what did we do in our daf today? We started with Rashbag, explaining Rashbag's opinion that you can't switch to anything. And why is that? And we explained because the fields, people go in certain cycles, and therefore it could be part of the plan of the owner, what was best for the land. Then we got to Rav Yehuda, who brought a different version of our Mishnah. And then we said, oh, well, in Babylonia, the land is different. And therefore, it doesn't matter to kitnit, but in Israel, the land is different, and kitnit is worse for the land. From there, we got into 3 statements of Rav Yehuda that he said to Rabin, 3 other statements about the cress and how it's growing among the flax and it's not stealing. We had about the trees that were on the border. And then we went to don't buy fields near the city. From there, we got to the contradiction and 2 different interpretations of Baruch Atah B'Ir, Baruch Atah B'Sadeh, and Darshaning those psukim, and how one of them, Rav's interpretation, contradicted Rav Yehuda. And then we said, well, if you put up a wall, then it's good to have near the city because it's convenient and it's easier for you and you can save money. But if not, it's going to bring ayin hara upon you. And from there, we got to ayin hara and the 5 different interpretations of what kol machalad. When we got to the last one, the gallbladder, we said how important it is to eat bread, and that protects you from all the diseases of the gallbladder. And from there, we got into 13 things that eating breakfast or eating bread for breakfast does for you. And then we got to a few halachot that Rav Yehuda said to Rav Ada, the measurer, about measuring. And from there, we got to that you have to cut the trees on the sides of the river. And from there, we got into the story, which you'll see as it continues into tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom, and we should have B'Sorot Tova.